think your baby's close to you. There's someone out there.
Surreal images of the pageant star transfixed the nation.
Were you a stage mother?
Probably. What's wrong with that?
No charges have ever been filed. Nobody ever convicted. Tonight, the theories, secrets, and bombshells.
Hurry. Patsy.
A CNN special report, the murder of JonBenét.
John Ramsey's odd behaviors, those subtle, unsettling signals Linda noticed, weren't detailed in the official accounts. Yet his reactions during televised interviews felt like surface symptoms of something darker beneath. If that's true, then who or what was the real power shielding the Ramseys from the consequences anyone else would have faced? That morning, Linda Arndt, the only law enforcement officer inside the Ramsey home, couldn't reconcile what she was seeing. The family had reported a kidnapping. A ransom note had clearly set a deadline. Yet when that time came, no one reacted. No checking the clock, no panic. Just an eerie, hollow silence that hung over the house like fog. John and Patsy stayed apart, never comforting each other. No hugs or whispered words, behaving like strangers in a shared tragedy. Linda sensed it immediately. It wasn't shock, it was a misalignment. Then she saw John in the kitchen, calmly flipping through his mail, not searching for clues, just sorting envelopes. A father with a missing daughter should have been tearing the place apart, but John was too calm, too focused. By late morning, with no backup arriving, Linda asked John and their friend Fleet White to help search the house again, floor by floor, without touching anything. Instead of following her instructions, John headed straight to the basement, as if he knew exactly where to go. Moments later came Fleet's scream for an ambulance. John emerged carrying JonBenét's lifeless body. He didn't shout for help or call 911. He laid her on the floor, face unreadable. Linda froze, every instinct telling her the killer was in the room. Then John took a throw blanket and covered the body without asking, contaminating the scene further. She tried to stop him, but it was too late. As she knelt beside JonBenét, John leaned close, their eyes locking, and Linda quietly slid her hand toward her gun, counting her 18 rounds. What followed was even more unsettling. Despite the bizarre behavior, the violations of protocol, and the clear need for a thorough investigation, nothing happened. Evidence disappeared. Leads dried up. Interviews were delayed or softened. Linda later said, "I know who killed JonBenét, but couldn't name the person. Someone she believed was being protected." For over 3 hours, Linda was trapped inside that house with 9 people, John, Patsy, their pastor, and friends, moving freely, whispering behind closed doors. No detectives arrived, no forensic team entered. Each time she called for support, she was told everyone was in a meeting. Even after JonBenét was found, the house remained unsecured, and at one point Linda saw an ambulance drive past without stopping. She thought, "I'm in the twilight zone." And then came the Ramseys' most telling move. They didn't wait for charges, accusations, or even suspicion. Within hours of finding their daughter's body, they hired separate high-profile criminal defense attorneys. From then on, they stopped cooperating with police, refused standard interviews, and filtered all communication through counsel. When public pressure mounted, they agreed to take polygraphs, but not through law enforcement. Instead, they arranged private tests in a controlled setting with their own hand-picked examiner. The results were mixed and ultimately inadmissible, but the media still ran with headlines claiming they had cleared themselves. Investigators weren't swayed. To them, it was a PR maneuver. Innocent people don't create their own parallel justice systems unless they fear the real one. Over the years, the Ramseys offered conflicting statements about polygraphs, telling one interviewer they'd been willing to take them, and another that no one asked. The contradictions suggested not forgetfulness, but strategy. And when asked about arranging a flight to Atlanta shortly after finding JonBenét's body, John admitted calling his private pilot that same day. He claimed they'd been asked to leave the house and simply wanted to go home, but to many, that decision marked more than grief. It suggested a deliberate retreat from the scene of the truth. It was a deliberate pivot, a move away from the epicenter of the investigation. Later, John would tell Barbara Walters that Atlanta was home and that they simply had nowhere else to go. But that wasn't the full story, because John didn't leave Boulder alone. Not long after the Ramseys departed, another family boarded a separate flight heading in the same direction. Fleet and Priscilla White, the very couple who had been at the Ramseys' side since the morning of December 26th, the family who took Burke Ramsey in while the house was still an active crime scene. This was the couple whose presence in the house, and especially in that basement, was far more critical than anyone seemed willing to acknowledge at the time. Fleet White, John's close friend, was the man who followed him into the basement that morning. He was the only other person to witness firsthand what was behind that door. He was there when JonBenét's body was discovered. He saw the tape, the bindings, the room, the condition of her body. And within days, he was gone. Not just from the house, but from the entire state. That's not grief. That's a coordinated exit. The police never stopped them. No one questioned the timing. But for those closely watching the investigation, it wasn't just the Ramseys distancing themselves from the crime scene. It was also the people closest to the moment the truth was uncovered. Why did both families leave Boulder so quickly? Why did the man who saw the crime scene with his own eyes vanish almost in step with the parents? And why did their relationship begin to quietly unravel in the months that followed? None of it made sense, unless you consider that someone might have seen something, known something, or been told something that made staying behind too dangerous. What began as one family leaving the scene became two, and with that, the silence grew larger, because the Ramseys weren't just leaving behind a house, they were leaving alongside the only people who had shared the most critical moment of that morning. The Whites weren't just casual friends, they were the Ramseys' inner circle. Fleet and Priscilla White had known John and Patsy for years. Their children played together, they shared holidays, went to church, and hosted dinners. In Boulder's tight-knit upper-class social scene, they were practically extended family. When tragedy struck on December 26, 1996, it was the Whites who were called. Their home was where Burke Ramsey was quietly taken, away from the chaos. Fleet White, not a detective or first responder, was the one who went with John into the basement and saw JonBenét's body. But their involvement didn't end there. More importantly, it didn't stay silent. Over time, Fleet White became one of the few close to the Ramseys willing to speak publicly and critically. His relationship with John soured, his trust in the investigation collapsed, and he began writing open letters, challenging the DA, questioning the integrity of the case, and accusing law enforcement of protecting certain individuals. Yet, in those first crucial days, the Whites were side by side with the Ramseys, not just as grieving friends, but as key eyewitnesses to the aftermath, the behavior, and the decisions that shaped the investigation from inside the house. They knew what Boulder looked like in the hours after JonBenét's death. They knew what was said, what wasn't, and then they left Boulder too. The question isn't just who the Whites were, it's what they saw before they chose to disappear. Among the many names linked to the JonBenét Ramsey case, the White family remains one of the most curiously under-scrutinized. On the surface, they were simply family friends. But if you track their movements before, during, and after the night of JonBenét's murder, a different picture emerges. One of proximity, access, and inexplicable loyalty. On the evening of December 25, 1996, just hours before JonBenet would be reported missing, the Ramseys stopped by the White's house to drop off Christmas gifts. According to Priscilla White, Patsy stayed and chatted for about 10 to 15 minutes. She described the Ramseys as cheerful, festive, and excited about their upcoming trip, showing no signs of exhaustion or abnormal behavior. Strangely, she never mentioned JonBenét being sleepy or drowsy. That omission might seem minor until you contrast it with Patsy's later statement to police that JonBenét had fallen asleep in the car and was carried straight to bed by John. Was this a harmless inconsistency or a fabricated detail meant to establish a timeline and cover alibi gaps? 2 days earlier, on December 23rd, the Ramseys had hosted a Christmas party at their home. During the event, a mysterious 911 call was made and abruptly disconnected. When police arrived, it was Priscilla, not a Ramsey, who answered via the intercom and told officers it had been a mistake, allegedly made by a guest trying to dial long distance. She refused to let them in. Why was a guest acting as the gatekeeper? And why deny police entry after a 911 call, especially in the home of a high-profile family, even if it was truly an accident? Priscilla's decisive intervention raised uncomfortable questions, but the deeper questions came after the tragedy. When JonBenét was found dead and the Ramseys were suddenly at the center of suspicion, they didn't move in with family. They moved in with the Whites, not for a night or a weekend, but for months. Patsy later described that period as her salvation. Priscilla quit her job at the University of Colorado to care for Patsy full-time, cooking, organizing, managing visitors, and taking on a role that others described as Florence Nightingale-like. This wasn't just compassion, it was complete personal sacrifice, and it only made sense if there was more at stake than simple friendship. By mid-1997, both families relocated to Atlanta. The Ramseys moved first. John had family there and corporate ties, but soon after, the Whites followed. Glenn White resigned from his job, sold their Boulder home, and moved his family to a new house not far from the Ramseys. Their children attended nearby schools, the families vacationed together, and even transported each other's children across state lines. In one instance, the Whites personally drove Burke from Georgia to the Ramseys' Michigan summer home. John later said that Burke felt completely at home with the Whites because they had lived together for so long. This level of closeness went far beyond ordinary friendship. It bordered on codependence. Yet in his initial police interview, John described the Whites as mere acquaintances. That contradiction, between his statements to investigators and reality, casts a long shadow. There's no public record of financial ties or shared legal defense, but both Glenn and Priscilla gave up stable careers to follow a family under suspicion for child murder across the country. No one does that without deep loyalty, shared stakes, or something to protect. As the investigation progressed, the Whites faded from public view, but their decisions, movements, and access during the most sensitive moments of the case remain undeniable. If anyone outside the Ramsey family knew more than they revealed, the Whites are the first place to look. Underneath her unwavering loyalty, Priscilla White's role crossed far beyond simple friendship. Her actions, calculated, deliberate, and at times legally questionable, showed a willingness to interfere with official channels, manipulate public narratives, and shield the Ramseys from scrutiny by any means necessary. The most telling example was the email impersonation scandal between 2000 and 2003. Priscilla created a fake Hotmail account made to look like the official address of Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner. From it, she sent multiple emails to journalists, investigators, and others involved in the case, crafted to appear as though Beckner himself was endorsing certain pro-Ramsey narratives and criticizing the police. One such email went to reporter Charlie Brennan, praising his writing. Another went to former lead detective Steve Thomas, implying official support during his legal battles with the Ramseys. The deception was uncovered only after Brennan contacted Beckner directly, who denied sending the emails. Authorities traced the messages to an IP address linked to Priscilla's home in Atlanta. When contacted by investigators in 2003, she refused to answer questions. The DA considered charges for impersonating a law enforcement official, a felony, but she faced no consequences, only a written warning. She dismissed it as a silly prank, but the timing and content suggested a clear intent to deflect scrutiny during a critical period for the Ramseys. And that wasn't her only intervention. In February 1997, while the Ramseys stayed in the White Home, a Globe reporter approached for an interview. Priscilla cracked the door, asked to see his credentials, then grabbed his ID and slammed the door before calling the police to report a suspicious person. The reporter was detained until his identity was verified. John Ramsey later recounted the story to colleagues with amusement, praising Priscilla's quick thinking. Within Ramsey circles, she became known as Patsy's pit bull. Her husband Glenn also played a role. In one incident, he and John reportedly chased a National Enquirer photographer through Atlanta in an attempt to seize exposed film. At the heart of it all was Priscilla's bond with Patsy Ramsey, a connection that blurred the line between friendship and entanglement. She left her job, opened her home, and took on full-time caregiving. She joined the family on trips, at medical appointments, and at media events. Rumors even claimed she once disguised herself as Patsy to mislead photographers. She maintained an active online presence, monitoring forums, challenging negative posts, and working to erase or discredit anything casting suspicion on Patsy. Former detective Steve Thomas even called her the information minister of Ramsey. And then there was their son, Doug White. He appears often in the timeline of the case. Some have speculated about his possible involvement, noting that Doug, a close friend of Burke Ramsey, was at the Ramsey home earlier on the night of December 25th, when the family stopped by to deliver a gift. Physical evidence found at the scene has led some to question whether he may have played a role. A high-tech boot print discovered in the wine cellar, initially considered a key piece of evidence, was later determined to belong to Burke. However, Doug's possible presence at the Ramsey home that night sparked speculation about his involvement. Adding to the intrigue, a Red Boy Scout knife owned by Burke was also found in the wine cellar, and the white nylon cord used to strangle JonBenét appeared to have been cut with this knife, suggesting that the children may have been involved in some activity together. Investigators also noted a Webster's dictionary at the scene, left open to the word incest, which fueled suspicions of an unusual or inappropriate event possibly involving Burke or Doug. One hypothetical scenario suggests that after the Ramsey family returned home from the Stein's house, Doug might have stayed behind to play with Burke. While playing in the basement, potentially with the Boy Scout knife or the nylon cord, an accident could have occurred. The play may have turned aggressive, resulting in JonBenét sustaining an injury, screaming, and then being struck on the head, possibly with Burke's baseball bat or a golf club, followed by strangulation with the nylon cord. In this theory, Doug may have been directly or indirectly involved in a rough game that escalated into tragedy. The aftermath of this supposed accident could have involved Doug being quickly removed from the scene to avoid suspicion. Susan and Glenn Stein might have been called to collect him, taking him back to their nearby home. If they were aware of the incident, they may have chosen to remain silent to protect their son, ensuring there was no formal record of Doug's presence in the Ramsey home that night. This could explain why his name never appeared in official accounts. However, this theory has major weaknesses. There is no hard evidence placing Doug at the Ramsey home at the time of JonBenét's death, nor proof he stayed after the family dropped off a gift. The physical evidence, the boot print, and the Boy Scout knife, is more directly tied to Burke than to Doug, making the case for Doug's involvement speculative without concrete proof. A related hypothesis proposes that the Stein family may have actively helped the Ramseys cover up the truth of JonBenét's death. Susan Stein, often called Patsy's pit bull, was fiercely loyal to Patsy after the murder. This loyalty was exemplified by allegations that Susan sent fraudulent emails posing as Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner, aimed at people connected to the case, such as reporter Charlie Brennan. These emails appeared designed to influence perceptions and steer the investigation's narrative, with one email, traced to Susan's Atlanta address, praising Brennan's article for aligning with the Ramsey version of events. In this scenario, The Ramseys could have contacted the Steins immediately after discovering JonBenét's death, seeking Susan's help in creating a story to mislead investigators. Some theorize she might have even assisted in drafting the ransom note, infamous for its length and oddly specific details, intended to make the crime appear to be the work of an intruder. Curiously, although the Steins lived only 84 seconds away, closer than any other friends, they were not called to the house on the morning of the murder, unlike other close friends and their pastor. This absence could have been deliberate, to keep them out of the chaotic crime scene and reduce the risk of their connection being noticed. Susan's alleged fake emails suggest a deliberate effort to control information and pressure the media toward a pro-Ramsey stance. From mid-February 1997, the Ramseys even stayed with the Steins in Boulder until Burke finished his school year, with Susan acting almost as a caretaker during a period of intense public scrutiny. Later, Glenn Stein left his job at the University of Colorado and moved the family to Atlanta, where he worked for John Ramsey's company, further solidifying the long-term bond between the families. Burke also stayed with the Steins while the Ramseys were in Maryland. Even so, this theory also suffers from a lack of direct proof. There is no physical evidence tying the Steins to the crime scene or the ransom note. Susan's interference could be seen as overzealous friendship rather than criminal complicity, and there's no definitive sign the Steins knew exactly what happened that night. Their deep loyalty might have been personal rather than part of a coordinated cover-up. If such a cover-up did happen, the most common theory is that they were protecting Burke. However, involving the Steins might have been risky, as it would increase the number of people aware of the truth, unless what they were protecting was something even bigger. Another prominent hypothesis points toward John Ramsey himself, suggesting he may have been involved in illegal activities through his company, Access Graphics, possibly drug trafficking, money laundering, or both. Supporters of this theory point to the family's lavish lifestyle, the company's rapid growth, and its acquisition by Lockheed Martin, a corporation with its own history of controversies. Some believe John used his private plane to transport illegal drugs, taking advantage of his flying hobby and frequent trips to California for business, trips reportedly frowned upon by Lockheed Martin. Critics note that the Ramseys' expensive lifestyle, which included multiple homes, boats, luxury cars, and costly renovations, seemed disproportionate to legitimate earnings, especially given John's history of job terminations, including one for embezzlement to support his hobbies. Boulder, where the Ramseys moved in 1991, was a wealthy but allegedly corruption-prone community, potentially an ideal base for such operations. Lockheed Martin's predecessor, Martin Marietta, had been involved in multiple scandals, including a $100 million fine for defective aircraft parts and drug-related arrests of employees in the 1980s. This history fuels the idea that John could have exploited lax oversight to smuggle drugs or launder money through Access Graphics, a small intermediary company that achieved outsized profits within 5 years of its founding. The company's sudden dissolution by Lockheed Martin soon after JonBenét's murder is cited as suspicious, possibly an attempt to distance the corporation from any illicit ties. A combined theory suggests John used his plane for drug transport and laundered the profits through Access Graphics, explaining both the family's wealth and the opaque nature of their finances. John's extravagant spending, which persisted after his first marriage ended due to financial strain and infidelity, was further supported by Patsy's wealthy family. Yet even that support may not fully account for the Ramseys' lifestyle. Lockheed Martin's questionable history adds weight to suspicions that Access Graphics could have been a cover for illicit profits. Proponents argue that the Ramseys' behavior after the murder, along with their continued close association with the Steins, suggests a network designed to control information and protect shared secrets. The ransom note, with its unusual length and wording, could have been an attempt to explain forensic anomalies like the foreign DNA found on JonBenét and to divert attention from the true culprit. Some friends, like Fleet White, reportedly acted in suspicious ways, adding to perceptions of a wider cover-up. Still, these theories have no direct supporting evidence, no incriminating financial records, no credible witnesses, and no law enforcement confirmation. The family's wealth could be explained by legitimate business success and family support, while Access Graphics' dissolution could simply have been corporate restructuring. Without hard proof, the claims remain speculative, an intricate web of possibilities that has never been conclusively proven. Similarly, the actions of associates like the Steins could be interpreted as stemming from personal loyalty rather than participation in a cover-up. The ransom note and foreign DNA, while suspicious, might be explained by alternative factors such as contamination or the presence of an intruder, without requiring a complex conspiracy. In conclusion, the theories involving drug trafficking and money laundering provide one possible framework for explaining the Ramsey family's wealth, the rapid growth of Access Graphics, and their behavior following JonBenét's murder. Lockheed Martin's troubled history lends some plausibility to these theories, suggesting an environment where oversight may have been lax. However, without concrete proof, these ideas remain speculative. The Ramsey case continues to captivate the public due to its unresolved nature and the possibility that critical pieces of the puzzle, whether linked to criminal activities or personal secrets, remain hidden. Injustice still prevails. The city of Boulder, Colorado, often portrayed as a picturesque, affluent, and liberal community with a population of around 90,000, has been described as harboring underlying issues of corruption, particularly in the context of the JonBenét Ramsey case. This perception comes in part from sources such as former Detective Steve Thomas, who, in his book, suggested that corruption in Boulder might run deeper than he could fully express or uncover. While Thomas did not provide direct evidence of systemic corruption tied specifically to the Ramsey case, his remarks contributed to a broader narrative of institutional problems, particularly within law enforcement and the judicial system. This perception was reinforced by later developments involving Boulder Police Department BPD personnel. In 2022, 5 Boulder police officers, including a key investigator from the Ramsey case, were disciplined for failing to properly investigate cases. John Andrew Ramsey, JonBenét's half-brother, publicly criticized one of these officers for neglecting leads, including DNA evidence, and described the officer's reassignment as a demotion. These incidents further fueled the narrative of incompetence or negligence within the BPD, with some viewing them as signs of deeper systemic flaws. Among the various theories connected to JonBenét and her pageant involvement, one posits that the 6-year-old may have been targeted by a child exploitation ring due to her participation in beauty pageants. This theory, prominently explored by author Steven Singular in Presumed Guilty, argues that JonBenét's appearances in pageants, where she wore elaborate costumes, heavy makeup, and performed in ways some considered provocative, might have drawn the attention of predators or individuals linked to illicit networks. Singular contends that the intense focus on John and Patsy Ramsey during the investigation overshadowed other possibilities, including the involvement of external perpetrators connected to child exploitation. He suggests that while the Ramseys may not have been directly responsible for their daughter's murder, they may have inadvertently placed her in danger by exposing her to the pageant world, where she could have been noticed by dangerous individuals. Singular notes that the grand jury in the case did not recommend charging the Ramseys with murder, but rather with child abuse or endangerment for placing JonBenét in a risky environment, highlighting the potential dangers of the pageant circuit. Under the guidance of her mother, Patsy, a former beauty queen, JonBenét competed in numerous pageants, wearing glamorous outfits, performing routines that required singing and dancing, and involving significant investment in costumes and training. After her murder, media outlets widely circulated images and videos from these events, sparking debates about whether her public presentation could have attracted predators or those involved in child exploitation networks. While pageants themselves are a legitimate activity, they placed JonBenét in the public eye in a way that some believe made her vulnerable to individuals with malicious intent. Over the years, several people with ties to child exploitation have been considered in connection to the case, though none have been definitively linked to her murder. Gary Howard Oliva, a registered sex offender living near the Ramsey home at the time, became a suspect after his 2000 arrest for drug possession, during which he was found carrying a photo of JonBenét and a stun gun, a detail of interest since some investigators speculated a stun gun had been used in the crime. In 2016, Oliva was arrested again for distributing child sexual abuse material after Google reported 22 images of children under 10 uploaded from Boulder IP addresses. Despite initial suspicions from John Ramsey himself, DNA evidence from the crime scene did not match Oliva's, leading to his elimination as a suspect. Similarly, photographer Randy Simons, who had taken JonBenét's pageant photos, aroused suspicion when other mothers reported seeing inappropriate images of young girls displayed in his studio. Following the murder, Simons proactively contacted parents to declare his innocence. Although he was not an initial suspect, his 1998 arrest for public indecency and his 2019 conviction for downloading child sexual abuse material in Oregon fueled further speculation. However, no DNA or physical evidence connected him to the crime. John Mark Carr, a teacher who confessed to JonBenét's murder in 2006, also had a history of child exploitation charges dating back to 2001, but fled before prosecution. Despite his detailed knowledge of the case, Carr's DNA did not match the crime scene evidence, and he was ruled out as a suspect. The JonBenét Ramsey case has long been marred by controversial decisions made by Boulder authorities, particularly the Boulder Police Department, BPD, and the District Attorney's Office, which have fueled public skepticism and speculation about the integrity of the investigation. From the outset, the handling of John and Patsy Ramsey drew criticism for perceived favoritism, as authorities appeared to treat them more as victims than suspects. This perception was reinforced by the DA's office, granting the Ramseys' legal team unprecedented access to police files, a privilege rarely afforded in homicide cases. Regular meetings between the Ramseys' attorneys and an assistant district attorney liaison deepened suspicions of an overly close relationship, suggesting that the family's wealth and influence may have shaped the investigation's direction. These actions laid the groundwork for accusations that the authorities were either incompetent or unduly influenced, casting a long shadow over the case's credibility. One of the most contentious decisions came in 1999, when, after extensive deliberation, the grand jury voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges related to child abuse and accessory to a crime. This indicated their belief that the Ramseys had placed JonBenét in a dangerous situation or had aided someone responsible for her death. However, District Attorney Alex Hunter declined to sign the indictment, citing insufficient evidence to proceed. This decision, kept secret until 2013, outraged many who believed the Ramseys should have faced legal consequences. Critics argued that Hunter's refusal to prosecute was influenced by the family's prominence and resources, and that it contradicted the grand jury's findings. The lack of transparency surrounding this choice only fueled speculation that the Ramseys' social and financial status afforded them special treatment. Another controversial move came in 2008, when DA Mary Lacey issued a public letter exonerating the Ramseys. Citing unidentified male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing, Lacey declared them completely cleared of suspicion, a bold statement that stunned investigators who had spent years building a case against the family. This decision was widely criticized as premature, especially since the touch DNA evidence was not conclusively linked to the killer and could have come from incidental contact. A former investigator from the DA's office argued that Lacey's close relationship with the Ramseys compromised her objectivity. Many viewed the exoneration as more of a public relations move than a legally sound conclusion, further eroding trust in Boulder's justice system. The rift between the BPD and the DA's office added yet another layer of controversy. The police largely viewed the Ramseys as suspects, focusing on inconsistencies in their statements and the unusual ransom note found at the scene. In contrast, the DA's office, especially under Lacey, leaned heavily toward the intruder theory, which held that an unknown outsider committed the crime. This fundamental disagreement fractured the investigation, with each agency working at cross purposes. A private investigator hired by the DA's office resigned in frustration, citing the police's refusal to consider evidence supporting the intruder theory. Public awareness of these internal conflicts underscored the lack of coordination and raised questions about whether external pressures influenced prosecutorial decisions. The perception that the DA's office shielded the Ramseys while sidelining police efforts intensified suspicions of favoritism, or worse. Rumors of bribery circulated, fueled by John Ramsey's wealth as CEO of Access Graphics, a Lockheed Martin subsidiary, and the family's lavish lifestyle. Their ability to hire top-tier legal counsel and delay police interviews until April 1997 for initial statements, and June 1998 for formal questioning, was seen by some as evidence of undue influence. The 1999 indictment of Boulder attorney Thomas C. Miller, accused of offering $30,000 to a handwriting expert for a copy of the ransom note, further fueled these rumors. Although authorities suggested Miller acted for a tabloid rather than the Ramseys, the incident reinforced the broader narrative that money was changing hands to control the case's outcome. The Ramseys' close relationship with a prominent local couple, who later relocated with them to Atlanta and whose husband subsequently worked for John Ramsey's company, also raised questions about whether such ties were part of an effort to maintain loyalty and control information. The DA's office's leniency, particularly under Lacey's tenure, sustained rumors that financial or social influence played a role in the Ramseys' treatment. Yet no concrete proof of direct bribery, such as financial records or witness testimony, has ever emerged. Most of these allegations stem from the family's wealth, their ability to mount an extensive legal defense, and the perception that they received preferential treatment compared to less affluent suspects. In similar cases, failure to pursue alternative suspects aggressively has drawn criticism, and the Ramsey case is no exception. Several individuals with troubling histories, including a registered sex offender living near the Ramsey home, were investigated but quickly dismissed due to mismatched DNA or lack of follow-up. Some believe the police's focus on the Ramseys, while ignoring other leads, was a deliberate choice to avoid confronting powerful interests. John Ramsey himself has criticized the police for not using advanced DNA techniques such as genetic genealogy to analyze remaining evidence, a point echoed by a documentary filmmaker who noted the department's reluctance to share updates with the family. This stagnation, combined with the DA's public support for the Ramseys, reinforced the belief that the investigation was compromised, whether by incompetence or external pressure. Ultimately, the controversial decisions in the JonBenét Ramsey case, from the refusal to prosecute despite the grand jury's recommendation to the public exoneration based on contested DNA evidence, have left a lasting impression of a flawed and possibly biased investigation. Rumors of bribery, while unproven, persist due to the Ramseys' wealth, their influential connections, and the authorities' inconsistent actions. The case remains a stark example of how wealth and influence can shape public perception. Even in the absence of definitive proof of corruption, the lack of resolution keeps these controversies alive, leaving the truth about JonBenét's murder obscured by doubt and speculation. Nearly 3 decades later, the Ramsey case offers sobering lessons about the modern justice system, exposing its vulnerabilities and the critical roles played by its institutions. It underscores the importance of competence, coordination, and impartiality among law enforcement, prosecutors, and judicial bodies. The BPD's mishandling, paired with the DA's perceived favoritism, revealed how internal conflicts and bias can erode public trust. Effective investigations require skilled evidence handling, transparent communication, and unified strategies. Yet this case demonstrated how discord and prejudice can derail justice, leaving a child's murder unsolved. It also highlights the risk of wealth and influence distorting legal processes, the Ramseys' ability to secure elite legal representation and delay questioning raised concerns about unequal treatment, suggesting that affluence can grant protections unavailable to others. The grand jury's indictment, overridden by the DA, and the controversial exoneration based on disputed DNA evidence, illustrate how decisions can appear swayed by external pressures, whether real or perceived. If bribery did occur, as rumors suggest, the implications would be severe. Corruption erodes the rule of law, allows the powerful to evade accountability, and denies justice to victims like JonBenét. It also destroys public faith, discouraging cooperation with law enforcement and undermining trust in governance. The Ramsey case, with its unproven but persistent allegations of influence, stands as a cautionary tale about the fragility of justice when institutional integrity is questioned. It emphasizes the need for transparency, robust checks, and accountability to prevent systemic failures. Ultimately, it shows that justice demands an unwavering commitment to fairness, lest it become a privilege for the few rather than a right for all.